Well, hello and welcome to the February monthly livestream Q&A. I hope you're having a wonderful February. I'm so excited to be back on video. So lots of new things happening. I had a long time when I wasn't able to be on video, did not have a studio setup, but I'm back. It's not as posh as my previous studio. You know, we spent less than $100 million on this one, so it's a very basic studio. And it'll have to do. So tell me if you can hear me okay. I would like to know if the sound is coming through well and the screen and the video is coming through well. That would be nice. Yeah. What else? Oh, yeah, I've got a beard. How long did that take? Yes, it took 8 seconds from the moment I appeared that someone commented on the chat. Oh my God. All right, let's see. We got lots of great questions today, and I'm excited to answer them for you. Let's get right into it. All right, our first question comes from Nikolai. Nikolai asks, what are the best habits you can think of when it comes to privacy and reducing your odds of being a target? A great question from Nikolai. Privacy is a hard one because it's not just about technology. It's not a single thing that you can do that will keep you private. It's a whole host of things, and very much like security, and privacy really is a subcomponent of security. It's about tools, it's about people, and it's about process. So often in security we'll say tools, people, and process. So tools are things that you use. They don't have to be digital tools always, but nowadays, of course, a lot of digital tools are needed to secure and help yourself achieve privacy. But a lot of it also has to do with training, like understanding what the risks are for you specifically, and understanding what you can do to protect yourself. I can't possibly begin to give you a list of things that you can do. There are actually many good books that you can get on the subject, from relatively old classics like How to Be Invisible, all the way to more modern, more technically oriented books. And it's a combination of things. It's about protecting information such as your address. It's about habits. For example, not giving out your real name if you don't need to, or not revealing voluntarily information all over the place when you don't really need to reveal that information. And so once you start doing it, first of all, many of the people around you will find it weird and will wonder why you're doing this, because most people really don't do anything to protect their privacy. They are shockingly sloppy when it comes to personal security and privacy. But just like, using long passwords and protecting yourself with your digital devices, good privacy habits after a while become easy. At first it's difficult. It takes a lot of setup of tools and processes, things like mail forwarding and things like VPNs and two-factor authentication and things like that. It takes a lot of practice to learn how to use these tools and use them well. But then after a while, these habits really just run in the background. And then you're shocked when you go with a friend to a coffee shop and at the request of a 12-year-old barista, they provide their full first, middle, and last name so that it can be shouted out to all the people present in the coffee shop. Like, why? Why? As you've probably heard me say before, if I order coffee, I'm Montezuma or Donald Duck or Darth Vader. Who cares? As long as I pick up the coffee, does it really matter? Anyway, this is a great topic, but one that takes a lot more time than we have today. Let's see what else we can talk about. I knew this one was going to come up. Of course it was going to come up. There's two topics that are going to be unavoidable today, and this is the first one. Mike asks, what's your take on the Canadian truckers situation? And in fact, this is a set of like 3 different questions, all related to Canadian truckers. So we're going to run through all of them and answer them. The other topic, of course, is Russia and Ukraine. But for now, let's focus on the Canadian truckers. So for those of you who may not know, there's been a series of protests in Canada. And I think the pertinent topic here is that as part of these protests, the Canadian truckers who were doing these protests tried to fundraise to support their protest efforts and to buy more publicity and do various activities related to the protests. And initially they set up a GoFundMe, and the Canadian government shut that down. And then they set up a Bitcoin fund, raised quite a bit of money using Bitcoin. I don't know if they used any other cryptocurrency, but certainly Bitcoin was part of it. And then the Canadian government told exchanges operating in Canada to block withdrawals or exchanges from the addresses that were part of that fundraiser. So what's my take? You know, I've been asked this before, and I'll be very honest with you, because I think this is a matter where opinion and ideology and principles are clearly separated for me. When it comes to the topic of the protests and the kind of groups that have amassed themselves around this topic of protest, I could not disagree more. I disagree with the means, I disagree with the goals, I disagree with the groups that are involved in that. I find many of them to be odious, and I would not have a beer with these people. But on the other hand, I look at the actions of the Canadian government, and, you know, my opinion that these people are odious is my opinion, and my desire to engage or not engage with them, to fundraise for them or not fundraise for them, is my choice. I did not outsource that choice to the Canadian government. Now, if I was a Canadian, of course, I'd be even more offended with this, because this would affect me very, very deeply. Because my own government would have decided to take it upon itself to decide that this particular topic of protest, this ideology, these groups involved in this and all of that, isn't allowed to use money in their political expression. First, it's not allowed to use money through the traditional banking system, and then is not allowed to use money through alternative funding systems, including cryptocurrency. Now, I have a problem with that. I have a problem with outsourcing the decision-making of what speech is okay and what isn't, and giving that power to a government, because governments abuse it. This is where this is going to tie in to the whole Putin, Russia, and Ukraine. We'll talk about how the banking system has been abused by dictators. Not, of course, that Trudeau is a dictator, but the tactics of using currency controls, financial controls, banking controls to suppress speech you don't like should be abhorrent to anyone who believes in democratic norms and institutions. So I'm against that. All right, let's look at the practical aspect of that. And I think we have another question about this regarding the use of blacklisted addresses and how those have been blocked. And that question is this question. The Canadian government is blocking some Bitcoin addresses in an attempt to stop funding for the trucker protest. What can I do if my address is blocked? Are there any proposals to Bitcoin which will prevent this type of censorship? This is a really good question. So let me first say that this is a completely ineffective attempt by the Canadian government to impose what they see as the powers that they have over the traditional banking system to Bitcoin and to cryptocurrencies in general, but especially to Bitcoin. And the simple answer is they can't really do the things that they can do in traditional finance. In traditional finance, they can say freeze that account, and all of the money in it is immediately frozen, seized, etc. In the Bitcoin space, all they can do is they can block some addresses. What does it really mean to block some addresses? Well, they can't block those addresses from performing transactions. And the reason they can't block those addresses from performing transactions is because they don't have the private keys. Because control over funds in Bitcoin is entirely up to who has control over the private keys. Censorship resistance, the ability to say, well, you can say I shouldn't do a transaction, but I'm going to do it anyway. The ability to control your own money is the core principle for which decentralization is needed, not just in Bitcoin, but in every system where decentralization in the financial space is a desirable feature. The reason for decentralization is censorship resistance. If what you're trying to build does not need censorship resistance, if what you're trying to build is not being censored, will not be ever censored by anyone, then you do not need a decentralized system. And in fact, it's terribly inefficient. We pay the price of inefficiency because censorship resistance is very important in money, especially money that is used for political speech. And we see this again and again. So first of all, Anonymous asked, what can I do if my address is blocked? It wouldn't be your address that's blocked. What they would normally do in these situations is they will block the addresses that received the funds in the fundraiser. So they block the addresses of the group that is fundraising. How many addresses does that group have that receive the funds? Well, if they did it the dumb way, they have one address which is publicly displayed somewhere and everybody deposits money into that address. And then of course it's easy to block because you just block one. If they did it the smart way, which doesn't require a lot of infrastructure. You could probably do it on a Raspberry Pi running BTC Pay server. They will do the right way of doing donations and addresses and transactions in Bitcoin, which simply involves using a new address for every transaction. Now, of course, me talking about how e-commerce and fundraising should be done the right way with the principles of censorship resistance is the kind of thing that can get me in trouble with Canadian authorities. I mean, they already referred the CEO of Coinbase and the CEO of Kraken to the Royal Canadian Mounted Police to look for potential charges against them for proposing that you should use your own keys and not use custodial services. It's not very, very far to go from penalizing money used in political speech to penalizing speech used in political speech to penalizing technology used in political speech. It's all one thing. When money is technology, and because money is speech, you can't pull these things apart. They're intimately, closely linked together. The bottom line here is that if the Canadian government says you cannot use these addresses, what they mean is if you bring funds from these addresses to exchanges, those exchanges will not allow you to convert them into Canadian dollars. And they really can only do that to exchanges that are licensed by the financial authority in Canada that operate in Canada and exchange Canadian dollars. They can't tell, I don't know, Binance, you won't take money from these addresses. So they can only affect exchanges, and they can only affect exchanges in one jurisdiction that are operating under the license. They can't affect peer-to-peer transactions. They can't affect cross-chain atomic swaps. They can't affect decentralized markets. They can't affect Lightning Network. They can't affect pretty much any of the infrastructure of cryptocurrency. They can only affect the centralized institutions that act like banks, play like banks, and are therefore something that the authorities can block like banks. Of course, if you're the CEO of one of these exchanges, the Canadian government comes to you and says, you're licensed, you must not accept funds from these addresses. You don't accept funds from these addresses. It's very simple. You're not going to force all of your customers to shut down their accounts and leave the country and take some kind of ideological position. ultimately, they're not just going to block these addresses. They're probably going to do something that's called a look ahead or look behind, and they're going to look at several hops. What does that mean? If they simply block that address, you would just take all of the money, move it to a new address, and then show up at the exchange with that one. But they probably tell the exchanges that they have to consider coins originating from these addresses as tainted, and that taint will carry forward several transactions. How many transactions? It depends. 5, 6, 7, 10. We call these hops. And they may even go as far as to try to block addresses that you used to fund these. And if you did it the smart way and used one address per transaction, well, the address that they're going to try to block is now empty because you used it to fund this transaction, and all of your money is in a new address, which is change. So really what they're trying to do isn't feasible. It isn't feasible because accounts and addresses are different things, because Bitcoin addresses are not bank accounts. They don't operate like bank accounts. They don't behave like bank accounts. They don't have the limitations and weaknesses of bank accounts. And most importantly, it doesn't take me 45 minutes of staring a pasty-faced banker in the face at their office in the local branch in order to open a new Bitcoin address. I can generate about 10,000 Bitcoin addresses per second and do many, many transactions to move money between all of these addresses anytime I want. It demonstrates a fundamental misunderstanding of how the technology works, or rather, it demonstrates that they don't care how the technology works. They just want it to succumb to the same measures. DLH asks, after donating Bitcoin to the Canadian truckers, I am wondering if the Bitcoin on my ledger hard wallet is safe from government confiscation. If you have your keys on a hard wallet and not an exchange, can government still take it? They can't take it even if you're on an exchange. That would require due process. In most cases at least, not a lot of due process, but at least some due process. They certainly cannot take it from your hardware wallet. Don't worry. They can flag the specific addresses from which you sent that money, and maybe even some of the change addresses that you sent it back, and prevent you from dealing with that exchange again. If you sent that money to an exchange-hosted custodial address that was perhaps used by the Canadian truckers, you might find that your exchange accounts are shut down. They might have to basically delist you from being able to access that exchange. So you'll find yourself blocked from that one exchange. It's unlikely this is going to be a long-term issue for you, but most importantly, your keys, your coins, no one can confiscate money that you have on your ledger without actually sending cops to your house and going through a legal process to impose sanctions and fines on you. They certainly can't technologically simply remove the money that's on your ledger. Otherwise, what's the point if Bitcoin worked like that? All right, let's see what's happening in the chat and see what you think. Lobster Messiah says, congrats on the new book. Can't wait to read it. I'm so glad you noticed. There's something really special about getting the physical copy. Like, it all just seems surreal. You meet deadlines, things happen, you get congratulations emails from your editors, and then nothing happens, because it's not like every time someone buys a book on Amazon or when it launches, a bell goes off in my house. Oh wait, that would be really cool. Like, if somebody could make something like that, maybe with the Amazon APIs, a lot of authors would want that tool. But essentially nothing happens. And then 3, 4, 5 weeks later, there was a shortage of the books at first. They didn't print enough, which is great news because it sold well. Eventually, 5 weeks later, I got my own copy. By the way, this isn't the copy that the publisher sent me. I didn't get that. That one went to a storage location. This is one I bought myself on Amazon because it wasn't being delivered fast enough. So, yes, thank you for that. I really appreciate your congratulations. Let's see what else. There's a lot of questions on the chat room, but the questions really are going to be addressed from the Slido because a lot of people voted. I mean, we have hundreds and hundreds of votes for these questions, and that allows us to pick the best questions. So you'll notice the moderators jumping in and going, ask on the Slido, and that's because we're not going to be able to do it otherwise. Beard is great. Is that a real beard or a deep fake? Looking pretty sexy there, Andreas. Love the beard. Thank you. See, all of these completely off-topic questions which are allowed on the Slido. Any questions or comments that are about the fact that I look good are allowed to bypass the Slido and be used in the chat. That's what the chat is for. All right, let's go back to the questions now. This question comes from Zekas. Zekas asks, what's a Lightning address? How do they work? Are they supported by most Lightning wallets? And do you think they will become part of the Lightning standard? I'm not quite sure what you mean by a Lightning address. There are a number of different identifiers that are used in a variety of ways. If you want to make a payment, the equivalent of a Bitcoin address in the Lightning Network is a Lightning invoice. It looks similar to a Bitcoin address in that it is an almost indecipherable string of characters, uppercase, lowercase. It uses base 32 encoding, which is similar to the base 58 encoding of a Bitcoin address. And so you'd see this big blob of letters and numbers. Lightning invoices have more information in them because they carry the special prepayment, the payment hash, which is necessary to route the payment to the recipient, and a bunch of other information, perhaps routing hints and things like that. So they tend to be bigger. Often they're like a paragraph of text, a Lightning invoice, but they still fit into QR codes, and that's often how you would pay a Lightning invoice. You can also have the address of a Lightning node, and that Lightning node address can be used to open a channel to that Lightning node. There's a whole overlay protocol called LNURL that does a number of things where you have various functions encoded as URLs inside long alphanumeric strings. And these can do things like send direct payments, request payments, generate invoices, identify Lightning nodes, and various other things like that. Among all of these proposals around LNURL often have a web server sitting behind them. So you scan the QR code, your wallet goes to a web server, does an exchange over HTTP, for example, to generate a Lightning invoice for your payment, and then receives that over the HTTP connection. So I don't know if that's what you mean by a Lightning address. I hope that helps. We covered a lot of ground there. And if you meant something else, I'll need the clarification. Maybe if you're in the chat, you can go over that. Let's see, what else? So I see Vishnu is asking about censorship, and perhaps I didn't answer the questions as directly as you would like, so let me answer them even more directly. What I described is all of the reasons why you can't effectively censor Bitcoin. You can only censor the custodial endpoints and bank-like organizations that sit at the edges of Bitcoin, and you can very easily bypass those restrictions if you're determined to do so. So these are the types of measures that really punish the innocent, because sophisticated actors can easily bypass these things. More broadly, though, if you want to have truly uncensorable systems, you need a higher degree of privacy. You need anonymity, you need untraceable amounts, payments, recipients, and senders. The kind of privacy that unfortunately Bitcoin does not have. I have been a proponent for increasing the privacy of Bitcoin because if you think about it, if there were no addresses to block, then the Canadian government would not have been able to do that. So, for example, if the truckers had been raising money using Monero, the address that they received Monero would not appear anywhere on that Monero, and neither would the address that had sent it or the amount. So the end result would be, even if the Canadian government said block this, the exchanges would be like, well, we have no way of doing that, and even if we did, we wouldn't see this address because it doesn't get carried forward. There's no connection between transactions like there is in Bitcoin. Of course, the end result would be governments would say ban this cryptocurrency entirely, and then you can only use it on a peer-to-peer basis, which many people are quite happy to do. Because if you're banned, money isn't okay in Canada, you just sell it to someone who's not in Canada, who doesn't care because their government doesn't care about the protest that's happening in Canada. So this is really not something you need to worry about in terms of censorship. Yes, I am reading questions from the chat every now and then. This screen is the chat, this screen is the Slido questions, and I'm going back and forth just so I want to see if there's like follow-ups, but I'm not going to answer new questions from the chat, just follow-up questions. All right, let's see what else we've got. So in that vein, the question from Anonymous, can you please review how the Lightning Network improves privacy and what are some of the ways this privacy can be undermined? Thank you. So the Lightning Network improves privacy because the transactions do not happen on the Bitcoin blockchain. They happen between two channel partners and or routed over several channel partners in such a way that none of them know where the payment is coming from or where it's going. Other than the sender and the recipient, nobody knows who was making this transaction and why they were making it, who they were paying, where it was coming from. None of that information is visible. If you're running a Lightning node, your node doesn't know any information about payments that your Lightning node isn't the intended recipient or sender. So all of the transactions are pretty much private. Now, they're not 100% private because there are ways to get around these privacy protections. People can strategically place many Lightning nodes at key points by providing a lot of liquidity on the Lightning network. Effectively, you have to run a Lightning node with real channels, with big channels, with lots of channels well connected to other big nodes, and hope that enough information routes through your node that you can begin, through statistical analysis, to piece together enough information. But again, de-anonymizing senders and recipients is very difficult. It's just as hard to de-anonymize the amounts because you don't know if the Lightning payments you're seeing flying across from your node's perspective is the full payment or only a part payment. That information is completely invisible. So it's really impossible to break it that thoroughly without infiltrating every single node out there. So the Lightning Network is effectively a peer-to-peer network in the most pure form. And as a result, because the information isn't broadcast or advertised to all of the peers, it's very difficult to figure out who's paying who. Which leads us to the next question, very relevant to this. Is there a way to know approximately how many transactions per second are happening on the Lightning Network right now? An order of magnitude error is fine. Would like to know how adoption is happening. I can give you a scale, somewhere between 0 and infinity. No, that's probably too wide. Let's narrow it down. Somewhere between 0 and 21 million Bitcoin. Honestly, Anonymous, I can't give you, not even to an order of magnitude approximation, even if I looked at the information going across a single node, even a well-connected node, and my nodes aren't that well connected. And I was to try to do some kind of traffic analysis. I have no idea which of the packets going past are payments, which ones are for rebalancing channels, which ones are being routed in a circular route that goes back to the same node in order to rebalance their channels, which ones are part payments, which ones are full payments. I wouldn't know if a payment going one way and then another payment going the other way are the same payment for the same two senders and recipients. You know, if you have nodes A, B, C, D, E, and A wants to send to E, they can follow the route A, B, C, D, E, but they can also follow the route A, C, B, D, E. And then if you were node C, you'd first see a payment going this way. You don't know who it's going to. And then you see it going that way. You don't know who it's going to. Do you add them up or do you subtract one from the other? Is one a payment and the other one a refund? Are they both parts to the same payment? There's no way to know any of this information. So, and in fact, one of the other things that's happening is the bigger the Lightning Network gets, the harder it is to describe it. Because as the network gets bigger, each node sees a smaller and smaller percentage of the total amount of traffic that's being routed across the network. Each node gets a smaller and smaller picture. You only see the stuff that's in your immediate vicinity between the immediate peers that are coming through your node. And so the bigger the network outside of that, the smaller perspective you have. The more payments that are happening and the more those payments are being split into multiple parts, the less information you have. And keep in mind, this is only for announced channels. We don't know, there might be an entire kind of dark Lightning network. Dark lightning, that sounds good. It's like dark energy flying through lightning bolts. Dark lightning network that could be all unannounced channels that are not being broadcast, where the routes are not discovered through mapping the network as they are most of the time, but instead they're included in the invoices. And so the sender and recipient are basically making payments over this entire dark network that we don't even know exists. All right, so let's see. Okay. Yes, bye-bye. Thank you so much to all of the moderators who are working hard to deal with annoying trolls, spammers, and crybabies on the chat. This is not a public forum. This is my chat on my channel. And if you don't like it, bye-bye. And if you don't manage to find the door on your own, one of the moderators will show you to the door, not very politely. And so we can move on. We don't need to be hearing your garbage on this chat room. So, thank you, by the way, to all of the people on Patreon who support me. Many of you are here today. I can see your names in the chat. Thank you so much for dropping in, as usual. Many of the friends and familiar faces that I see and hear from often who ask great questions and participate in the chat and help out. Please do a little emoji storm if you're a YouTube member, or not if you're a patron. Use some of the standard emojis just to say hello to the world. And thank you so much for me. Many of you knew that this was going to be my first video after almost 9 months of audio-only monthly live streams, and you knew that because we announced it, of course, for patrons only a couple days ago. And that's, you know, being able to see what we're doing before we do it, and getting early access to information and behind the scenes information is one of the reasons you support my work, and I really do appreciate all that you do. Thank you. All right. Let's see what else we have. And a quick comment from Jonathan on the chat. Privacy in Bitcoin is a dumpster fire. Lightning does help in this regard, but all we're doing is clawing back a minimal level of privacy. Open, transparent blockchains are not good for privacy. I could not agree more. And I've been saying that since the beginning. I've always said that that is one of the top priorities. We are, however, clawing back more and more. And I think it's important to think of this not in isolation. It's not just Bitcoin. It's an entire ecosystem of cryptocurrencies that in many ways, as I believe, and you've heard me say before, are not competing with each other. They work synergistically to support each other, and they can't all be good at everything. So, you've heard me say it here. Monero is far superior in terms of privacy. But Monero is an easy target as a result, and has been shut down and removed from exchanges and will continue to be attacked by legislators around the world because it's the obvious choice for an attack. So it doesn't have very good liquidity. Where does it get good liquidity from? Bitcoin. And how do you get from one to the other? Through atomic swaps with on-chain protocols that do not involve custodial intermediaries. There are ways that we can use the best features of different systems together to get an overall better result. It takes a lot of work, and that doesn't mean we shouldn't be doing more for privacy in Bitcoin. Faison asks, can you summarize why a 12-word seed now seems to be adequate when 24 words used to be the de facto standard? Faison, it comes down to two different issues that kind of merge together. The first one is that the security of the elliptic curve, SecP256K1, is estimated to be 128 bits. So the actual effective security you get from the Bitcoin curve is 128 bits of security, which is nothing to sneeze at. But elliptic curves have this characteristics that doesn't exist, for example, in other forms of asymmetric encryption, public-private key encryption. So you get less than the bits that are used in the curve numbers, in the points of the curve. So the order of the curve, if you like. As a result, if you know that the effective security of the curve is 128 bits, what's the point in choosing keys out of an entropy pool of 256 bits? You're not really using all of that entropy. 128 bits of entropy is sufficient to build the keys you want if the underlying security of the curve is 128 bits. So that's issue number one. Simply the curve isn't giving you that much security to start with, and so picking key size based on the order of the curve, not the effective security of the curve, was not necessary. The second part is 24 words are a lot more difficult to back up, restore, remember, record, transcribe, and all of the other things. It's difficult to manage 24 words. It's twice as easy to manage 12 words. Did you see that? That was like some on-the-fly, high-end arithmetic happening there. So that's why we want to use 12 words, because ultimately a lot of the security issues that arise in the practical application of cryptography across large populations have less to do with entropy and bits, and more to do with the human fallibility of trying to apply these complex technologies in a real world scenario. So if you make it much easier for someone to back up and recover a 12-word seed, they're less likely to do things that are stupid things, bad things, to reduce their security in other ways. For example, they're like, I can't do this on etched steel, so I'm going to put it on an encrypted USB drive or store it on Google Drive. So security is about the sum of tools, people, and process, as we've said before. And if you actually make it easier for the people and simplify the process, you get better security, even if on paper it might seem like you have less entropy. And in this case, you don't, because the elliptic curve doesn't actually give you the full 256 bits. So I hope that was helpful. Okay, there's some lively conversation, some of it quite technical, happening in the chat. And Jessica comes in to remind everyone that questions need to be asked on slido.com unless it's a directly related follow-up to something I just said. A clarification required, a complaint, a customer complaint, a reasonable complaint that I didn't answer it in the way that clarified it. I'll always accept that. Then I won't really be able to discuss it. All right. Let's see what else we have. Becker asks, is decentralization measurable? Can you say Bitcoin or any other blockchain is 99% decentralized? All right. So first of all, no, it's not. It's not measurable in any practical sense. No one has really developed any measurement system. If they do, I would like them to call the units Merkle-Nakamoto's. And so you could say, and pick a really, really small unit size, so that you could say that Bitcoin is 7.3 giga Merkle-Nakamoto's secure or decentralized. That would make it really cool. Also, really subjective and completely pointless. First of all, I don't think decentralization is simply a scale. It's not a scalar variable. It's more like a multidimensional or a vector, meaning that you've got to first describe which dimension or direction of decentralization you're measuring. Are you measuring decentralization in terms of deployed wallets, economic activity, holders, miners? Are you representing decentralization of the wallet infrastructure, of the node infrastructure, distribution of technology, education? You know, all of these things matter. Ultimately, all of these things play into how effectively the system can withstand attacks and be resistant to censorship. So the problem with that is that we can't measure decentralization against a single axis. We have to think about different degrees of decentralization in different directions, and then kind of try to get an intuitive feeling for the things that are really more decentralized or less decentralized in one dimension than another. And it's one of the things that, because there is no way to measure this or any units, it's very easy for people to throw around this word and claim it without actually proving anything or having any basis for their claim. You know, to say this is decentralized doesn't really mean anything. And so it's a marketing buzzword in some ways. Also, if we were to use a measurement, and here you've got percentage points, is Bitcoin 99% decentralized? The truth of the matter is, if I was to bake it down to a percentage point, I'd probably say it's 60% decentralized, and that's the best we have. And everything else is less decentralized than that. It's not 99% decentralized. There are many points and elements of centralization within Bitcoin. It's just far more decentralized than everything else. And also, does it matter that it is 99% decentralized if 99% decentralized makes it 100% unusable? You've got to realize that decentralization is one element that you're trying to implement in a broader set of design trade-offs. And if you maximize decentralization, then maybe you're minimizing usability. Do you need that much decentralization to resist censorship? Apparently you don't. You can resist censorship with less, because Bitcoin has managed to do so far. Okay, I'm going to take a quick little break, read the chat, and drink some of this coffee. It's beer. It's not coffee, it's beer. The answers are going to get more spicy the more I drink from this coffee. Very good. All right, now, in case this live stream wasn't political enough, why don't we get a bit political? Anonymous Coward asks, sanctions are, I'm just kidding. Anonymous asks, sanctions are a tool used against dictators and war criminals, Russia. Bitcoin obviates financial sanctions. Many people will say that this is bad. Is there a better alternative to pressure directors than financial repercussions? Okay, I will say I disagree 100% with the idea that it is bad that you cannot impose financial sanctions on flows of money with Bitcoin. And the reason for that has to do with the fundamental asymmetry of power. You see, the thing is, financial sanctions are a tool that is applied by the few, often supposedly on the few, but very often has unintended consequences and impact far beyond the intended targets. When you put sanctions on a country, the people of that country, innocent people who have nothing to do with these decisions, who don't have the ability to influence these decisions at all, are affected. The broader the sanctions, the more generic the sanctions, the less targeted the sanctions, the more people are affected. But even with highly targeted sanctions, again, more people are affected than the intended targets of this. And so, there is a better alternative to pressure dictators than financial repercussions, and that is to give the people in the country the tools to fight the dictator. Because if you think about it from this perspective, the West has been incredibly shy about imposing sanctions on Putin. It took an actual rolling of tanks into a democratic country, pretty much in the heart of Europe, to get for the first time a mention of sanctioning Putin himself and some of his inner circle, and to start talking about cutting Russia off the SWIFT system, which again would hurt a lot more Russians. So the problem here is that the people who have the choice to do these sanctions hesitate, and the reason they hesitate is because they understand that this has unintended consequences on their own populations as well. 30 to 40% of Europe's energy needs are paid in US dollars to Gazprom for Russian gas, oil, and coal. And so therefore, if you cut Russia off SWIFT, energy prices in Europe triple overnight at a time when we already have a lot of inflation. So who does that hurt? I'll tell you who it hurts. It hurts the poorest people in Europe. The irony of this is that some of the poorest people who will not have enough money for gas and heating will be Ukrainian refugees in Europe. Because those are the kinds of people who don't have power, and certainly not financial power, the dispossessed, the disadvantaged. So you have to really consider that from a broader perspective. Now let's look at it from a different perspective. This is about imposing controls on Russia banks. Well, who has done more to impose controls on Russia banks? Putin. Putin has used Russian banks to completely cripple any possibility of political opposition within the country. Putin has used the tools of financial sanctions, controls, currency controls, confiscations, expropriations, privatizations, nationalizations, etc., to punish his political opponents. He did it very famously to one of the biggest oligarchs, stripping all of his companies, seizing all of his assets in the Russian banks, and throwing him in jail, which sent a very clear message to all of the other rich people. And that message wasn't don't be rich, of course not. It was don't fund the opposition. And so Putin has actually benefited more from the tools of financial control than he has suffered from the tools of financial control. Giving uncensorable money to the Russian people would do more damage to Putin by removing his ability to control the finances of the many, rather than trying to create a world where all finance can be controlled by the few, which would give the power, supposedly, to Europeans, Americans, other nations that control the SWIFT system. But ultimately, that power comes with massive unintended consequences. If you want to prevent the dictator from using cryptocurrency to their advantage, you give the opponents of the dictator cryptocurrency. If you want to prevent the criminals, the narco-traffickers, from using cryptocurrency to their advantage, you make sure that the populations that they hold under their thumbs have cryptocurrency to fight back. The answer to limitations of freedom is more freedom for the opposition. It's not less freedom for everybody because of power asymmetry. There are more people who are opposed to what is happening right now than there are people who benefit from it. And because the power is concentrated in the hands of those who benefit from it, these decisions happen. If the power was not concentrated, but was in the hands of those who oppose war and invasion and enriching the defense industry, then Putin wouldn't be able to make this decision. And we wouldn't have this problem in the first place. So we don't fix the concentration of power by concentrating power. We don't fix the control over finances that has resulted in a dictatorship effectively in Russia in all but name, by creating financial controls that can spread the joy of dictatorship everywhere else in the world. Power to the people. And free Ukraine. So, I hope that was political enough. I'm probably banned from both Canada and Russia thanks to your questions. Are you happy? Are you pleased? Now I can't get good maple syrup or vodka. I mean, really. Anonymous asks, and we're back on censorship. I heard that software exists that could enable miners to neglect blacklisted wallet transactions. True or not? What protection does BTC have for this censorship? The protection that BTC has for this censorship is that mining is decentralized, and if one miner decides to not allow transactions that involve blacklisted addresses into their blocks, and there are miners who do that, they call these clean blocks, which is very, very ironic. Then another miner would pick up that transaction and earn the fee. Because miners are motivated by profit first and foremost. The miners who are doing this because what they want to do is get preferential status, is get an effective monopoly license in the jurisdictions where they operate. If you promise the regulators clean mining, they will only allow you to mine in the jurisdiction, giving you a massive first mover advantage in jurisdictions that decide to do this. That's not going to be effective in terms of financial constraints because, of course, the transaction can be mined by someone else and you have to accept the block, otherwise you're outside of the consensus system. You can't simply ignore that block that contained the bad transaction. So you're going to be building on top of that. Even if you're one of the clean miners, you're going to be building on top of dirty blocks. It's bullshit. It's bullshit in order to create a monopoly license to dominate mining within a specific jurisdiction. And it's not surprising that that happens in the US. The US has, in many industries, no meaningful competition. It is a series of legislated monopolies and market-constrained monopolies that pretend to be free market capitalism. All right. I'm spitting fire tonight. I think it's the beer. And my producer is queuing up the most controversial questions after I drink. Oh dear, I'm going to get myself in trouble. Let's see how many more countries I can get blacklisted from. So Canada, Russia so far. Let's see. Munching Muon asks, I've been binge watching your live streams in the reverse order in which they were produced. Is there a danger in doing this, violating the arrow of time, rendering the external world nonsensical? No, not really. It's not going to render the external world nonsensical. It will render me nonsensical. You see, under the rules of causality and rationality, I try to learn from new information, and when I find out something new, I change my opinion. Not always. Like every other human being, I can get stuck in my ideas and resistant to change from time to time. But I try to be flexible and adapt. And if I say something and then I find out that it's not actually correct, or that new information came to light that means I should have the opposite conclusion, I should draw the opposite conclusion, I draw the opposite conclusion. So if you look at my most recent video, I'm saying the things that are based on the most recent facts that seem to you and others who also have these facts perhaps correct and sensible. And then as you go further back and dig into the past, you're going to see me come up with opinions that are less and less relevant to the facts of today. So as you keep watching, I will get dumber and dumber and dumber. And it's on you, dude. I mean, it's a playlist. You can sort oldest first. MB asks, hello, my business accepts Bitcoin for payments. How should I protect my customers' transactions without mixing? CoinJoin? I also do not wish to get my customers flagged at their exchange because I know many send straight from their KYC accounts. If they send from KYC accounts, not much you can do to do that. However, if people are sending from wallets where they control their own keys, and those wallets are somewhat sophisticated, there's a really, really cool protocol that you can use as a merchant that actually increases the privacy of both your coins and the coins of your customers without doing what would be an obvious coin join and thoroughly borking the analytical tools that would be used by the various surveillance companies and privacy violating companies out there. And this protocol is called PayJoin, not CoinJoin, but PayJoin. So, you know, the basic concept behind a CoinJoin is that a transaction does not need to only contain inputs and outputs of a single person. You can instead construct a transaction where the inputs are from different people and the outputs go to different people, and then they each sign their own pair of input and output, and the transaction is only valid if I put an input in. If my output is also included, the transaction can be made valid, and that way I can't be cheated by a third party if I participate in a coin join. Great concept, yes, but if you see a transaction that has 100 inputs and 100 outputs and they're mostly the same amount, that is an obvious coin join, especially if the signature types on the inputs are sig hash anyone can pay and sig hash single and things like that. However, and this is where it gets spicy, you can actually use this protocol in a much more subtle way. And this is as follows. Let's say I'm Bob the merchant and Alice comes with a PayJoin enabled wallet to my shop, which has a PayJoin enabled server. Alice then selects a UTXO to buy my book, Mastering the Lightning Network, from my shop. Not really, but okay. So Alice selects an input and then has a payment that goes to me. So that's one input, one output, and maybe another payment that's changed. That's a normal transaction. Now, instead of actually signing and sending that transaction, Alice sends it over to me unsigned and in such a way that it's a partially signed Bitcoin transaction, a PSBT as it's known. And what I do is I add another input. So it's like Alice has a $10 bill to pay for my $5 book, and instead of doing $10 in, $5 for my book, $5 change, I put another $10 bill on her end, and then I make the payment on my end $15. So now there's 20 going in, 15 going for me, of which 10 is my own money that I've basically pushed into Alice's transaction alongside Alice's money. And I get it back because it's in my $15 payment to the book, which isn't actually 15, it's only 5. And this gets very confusing for the statistical analysis tools. And then Alice gets her $5 change. Alice has paid $5, but the transaction looks like a $20 input, $15 payment, $5 change, which, and one of those inputs is mine, one of them is Alice's, and if you correlate those two, you're now correlating all of the inputs of my shop, which are actually outputs from previous customers, with Alice's inputs from everywhere else, and you do that with a few customers, and the analytics go to hell. And it doesn't look like a coin join. It looks like a very, very simple customer payment, and it's brilliant. I love that protocol. All right, do we have time for one more? Oh, sure, let's do this one. It's a silly one. Let's do it quickly. It's not silly as a question, but it's going to be easy to deal with. Anonymous asks, if a hacker made a virus that forced Bitcoin to fork after every transaction, would that destroy the Bitcoin currency? All right, so the problem with this sentence is that when you say forced Bitcoin to fork, whose Bitcoin? Which Bitcoin? Bitcoin isn't a single thing. This is where decentralization matters. This is why decentralization matters. So the decision as to whether Bitcoin forks or not happens at every validating node and every mining node everywhere in the world. There are tens of thousands of these nodes. Hundreds or thousands of them are miners. Tens of thousands are not miners. But they all decide which chain they follow and therefore if they will fork Bitcoin. It takes a significant number of nodes to follow a potential fork chain for it to have any meaning other than a blip that disappears from everybody's radar immediately. So therefore, that virus would have to force both users of Bitcoin, wallets, exchanges, merchants, and miners all to do something that caused Bitcoin to split, and not just split into 1,000 little forks, because then the biggest one would just continue, but really, to really make this damaging, you'd have to split it almost in half. And you'd have to do this by infecting computers running different operating systems in different countries all over the world, some of which have no way of being reached from the outside, some of which are run by extremely sophisticated organizations, institutions, companies, and users who know how to configure firewalls, running all kinds of different versions of the Bitcoin core software and also non-Bitcoin core software to follow the blockchain. And they would all have to not notice and not do anything about it for a very long time for this to matter. And so this is the essence of why Bitcoin or any decentralized system like it works. It's because there is no one place you can attack. You have to attack all of the places. You have to do so successfully in all of the places. And most importantly, this isn't a monoculture. This isn't all Windows 11 with the latest zero-day vulnerability running Bitcoin Core version 22 or whatever. It's actually dozens of different operating systems running half a dozen different versions of Bitcoin Core, plus 3 or 4 versions of other software, all monitoring the blockchain for compliance with the consensus rules, and all of which would throw a hissy fit alarm that would echo around the world very, very quickly if something like that seemed to be happening in more places than one. And that's why you can't bring down Bitcoin with this. The best you could do is disrupt it for a few blocks. And then everybody would wake up, pay attention, phones would start ringing, and people would start doing things to the software to thwart your attack. It wouldn't last very long. And this would be only if you're the most sophisticated of actors. Ultimately, what you would do is you would generate the headline, incredibly sophisticated organization attacks Bitcoin, ... and fails, which is really the best news you could create for Bitcoin. And this is what we see again and again. Every attack that doesn't kill Bitcoin only proves the survival story and causes that survival story to resonate once more. Everyone will catch the Bitcoin got hacked headline. 3 months later, when they hear about Bitcoin again, they're going to be like, what, wasn't that hacked? Huh, it survived. And I would guess at least 3/4 of the people in Bitcoin came through that kind of avenue. They heard that the CEO got arrested. They heard that the Bitcoin got hacked. They heard that Bitcoin got banned by China and it is over, it's doom, it's dead. And then it survived. So that's then piques everybody's attention, because something that violates the conventional wisdom, that breaks the narrative, that does the thing that's unexpected, that causes cognitive dissonance, will get our attention. Our attention will tune into that very, very quickly. All right. I hope you enjoyed today's monthly live stream for February. We do these every month. They're open to the public. You can go on Slido the day of the event. If you're a YouTube subscriber, the day before. If you're a patron, a month before. And submit questions, vote, and participate in forming the topics we discuss. Whether you liked it or not, you can always subscribe and share with others. Like if you really, really hated it, what I'd like you to do is use the share link to create a link to the video and share it with other people you also think will hate it. And tell them all about this video that annoyed you so much. And then find out what beautiful things the YouTube algorithm will do for me. Also, if you want, hit the like, hit the dislike, doesn't matter. And see you next month. I believe our next session is March 26th or 27th. One more quick announcement. We just published another workshop in Spanish. Spanish subtitles on the videos and all of the materials translated into Spanish. You can find these workshops, among other things, on my website, antonop.com. We've got new workshops that can teach you how to use various things. Oh, that's the most advertising you're going to get from me today. Thank you so much for joining me today, and I'll see you in a month. Bye-bye, everyone.